Welcome to another episode of the Growth Focus podcast, where we bring together leaders from all across the globe to help us grow our businesses. My name is Gary Lafferty, your host, creator of the Authority Accelerator, where we promote tech leaders from the expert status that they are into the authority that they deserve to be, so that clients can chase them as opposed to them doing all the chasing. On this episode, I'm extremely excited to have our guest, Tori Bradford, and we'll be talking about all things team and people and culture balanced with profit. So if you're a tech company and you have a team, no matter small or large, this is definitely an episode you want to stick around for. Without further ado, Tori, it's an absolute pleasure having you here today. Why don't you give us a little bit about your background and how you got started and where you are today and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love the mission of this podcast is a great one. And it really lines up with what I do. I live right now north of Nashville. I'm originally from Illinois. We moved here about 10 years ago. It's a lot warmer. I love it. It's great. Until this week, it's pretty cold. But yeah, so I've been in the HR people field for about 20 years. And I have a real passion for, working with founders and CEOs to really just enhance their team and their culture. Unless you're hiring a bunch of robots, you've got people that work for you, and those people are unique and they have specific needs. And so, it's been my passion and my career to help people find fulfillment in their work. And so I love partnering with founders and CEOs to make it happen in their companies.
That's lovely, because as you quite rightly say, a business is still people orientated, isn't it? It doesn't matter if it's just you at this moment in time in your business or you're growing a team. Your tech, your service, your product might be absolutely superior, but ultimately it's still people. There's the people, whether it be client facing or internal. It's such a big culture. So I know you moved from the typical HR, let's call it a pocket or niche or framework, into people operations. But before we get onto that, because something that's what I want to delve into. So before we get onto that, why don't you just share a little bit about your personal journey of how you actually got started in it and how you ended up helping and finding this passion for founders?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts when I was a kid, really. I was a little bit of a nerdy kid who dreamed of being a librarian, of all things. I don't know why. That was just, I loved moving papers around. So of course, when I came into my adult life, one of my first jobs was in administration. It fit perfectly because it was paperwork and it was great and it was checklists everywhere. So it naturally evolved into a role in HR. And I remember one company I worked at, I started as an HR assistant, and my second week of work, the office manager quit. She just left. She didn't show up one day. And so I got promoted at, I think it was 19 years old, to office manager. And I had to figure out everything to get started. So that's when I first really got a taste for human resources and what it looks like to care for the people and make sure the schedules were on track. And so I started in that part of this industry. Was an interior design store. So it was, just really cool and fun and creative. But what I started to learn was that I just really loved the systems and the processes. And so from there, every place I worked, I kind of I kept looking for more to do with people, less to do with the accounting side that an office manager has and more to do with the people. And so that just kind of progressed I've always worked bricks and mortar companies and worked with, there's small to medium, never more than 50 people has typically been my niche. And when 2020 hit, I was working for a company here in Nashville, making the commute back and forth all the time. It just kept climbing in the 10 years since we've lived here. And when 2020 hit and I got a taste of work from home, I was like, ooh, this is pretty great. And I can do people stuff from home. That is possible. The company I was working for at the time wasn't interested in letting me work from home. So no problem. I separated from them and started my own business. And I started a consultancy called CPO on the Go, where I worked with small to medium-sized businesses that were either too small to have an HR department or they just didn't realize they needed one. They were kind of cowboying it and doing everything themselves and didn't realize, oh, there's actually a method here. And so that's been my journey. And so now I work remotely and I just really enjoy working with all different industries. When I had my business, I worked with several tech companies that were also fully remote. I also worked with people that were on site, some hybrid. And in today's day and age, you know, it's just across the board. Like remote work is expected these days, and that has its own challenges in, you know, how you build culture and your teams and the productivity, importantly. So yeah, that's been a little bit of my journey. And now I actually started working for one of my clients. I loved them. They were a very unique client. And so I actually closed down my business and started working full time with this one client. And I've been with them for 4 years now. I absolutely love it.
Fantastic. You know, and that's quite a journey as well. I love the way sometimes it doesn't necessarily, our careers don't necessarily fall in the way that we thought it would be.
Yeah.
But our background sometimes really lays great foundations for it. So let's get on to that difference then between typical HR, because obviously that's the terminology that most people are aware of. And obviously that's what was your initial stepping stone into this. And then you put your unique spin on this of people operations or operations of people. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because there'll be people watching here and listening and will go, well, what's the difference? You know, and we don't want anyone literally to assume what the difference is. So why don't we dive a little bit deeper? Let's talk about, first and foremost, why the name change, right, in your world, and then what does it really mean?
Yeah. It's not just like cool HR, right? Like some people are like, is that just the same thing but cooler? Like, no, it's actually very different. So in people ops, you do HR, but HR typically isn't doing people ops. So I made an intentional shift when I started my business towards people operations specifically. And there's a couple reasons for that. You know, I think I joke because most of us who have worked in corporate America have kind of like this image in our mind of what HR. It's the flickering light in the basement with a lot of filing cabinets, and oh no, I have to go down there and I didn't get a good review and now I'm going to go meet them and maybe they're going to fire me. And so there's this kind of picture that we conjure up, right? To like, it just is what it is, because there is a lot of compliance and checklists and things like that. And I think over the years, HR has become more of a function of process specific to let's check the boxes, let's get done what needs to be done. Now, to be honest, like, we have compliance legislation we have to worry about, right? We have benefits that we need to manage. We have a lot of very specific logistics that need to be done. So there is a purpose and a time for that human resources side. The shift towards people operations is one that's more about the human experience. So again, the HR piece, it needs to happen. And it is a part of what I do as people operations. But people operations is more looking at what are the humans experiencing? What kind of culture am I building? It goes beyond the checklists and the workbooks to what is the bigger picture here? How are they learning? How are they looking at their job? And it really gets in touch, you know, especially as our generations are changing and our generations are valuing different things. It gets in touch with that kind of almost like the mind-body connection idea, right? Like, you know, in health, we've made that shift from it's not just physical. You also have mental health and you have emotional health. It's the same idea in people operations. You have the human that works for us. They are complex and they have a lot of different pieces to them that make up the whole. And so people operations has made is really about a focus on that whole person and not just their benefits and their payroll and the compliance around it, but it's really about the environment in which they work as well. So that's a little bit of the difference between the two.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of a difference, actually. I know you packaged it up quite well, but there's actually quite a big of a difference there. And I couldn't help but think when I was listening to you there, being of a certain age, a little bit older, I'm thinking back to the times when we're looking into corporate America or the corporate UK in my case, and people then were literally I started my career with Nestle. There's this, and even though it's a Swiss company, there's this culture of, well, we have to have X amount of bodies to do the work, and here's the X amount, and this is the Y amount that we've got to give them some holiday every year. We'll give them, if we're going to give them a pension, we're going to give them a salary, and we're going to give them an annual review, and then we're going to give them a Christmas party. Boom. That's it. They do the work. We give these 5 things. We're done. Culture has changed so much dramatically over the last 30, 40 years. And you've mentioned this quite a number of times, like compliance. Right? Compliance is now one of the, and especially in tech, it is across all industries, but tech is one of those compliance issues that we have, especially as AR. What advice would you give to founders today who have probably either never had a team before or have had a team and they're people, but I still got this old school mentality. Well, they turn up, this is what I've got to give them as a package, and I've done my bit. How do you get them to foster this balance between compliance, this is what I need them to do for their work, and creativity within their organizations, but keeping the people part of it intact as well?
Yeah. Great question. And it's funny, Gary, when I had my business, the easiest way in the door with a founder was talking about compliance, because that scares everybody, right? Like everybody's like, shoot, that's something I don't know about. So that was always my foot in the door, was like, I can help you with compliance. But the real idea is behind how your people are functioning. And so my advice is, honestly, it's less about the how and more about your intention towards what you're creating. Compliance is going to come, especially if you're small. If you're a small business with 5 or less people, the government doesn't really care about you that much yet. So you've got some space to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. Now, there are some states that are harder than others. A simple Google search or ask ChatGPT which states are tough for compliance. It will answer you very quickly. There are some states that are certainly harder than others, but in general, most of our states are work for hire states, and the compliance is fairly simple to start. And so for me, the most important thing that I think a founder or a new founder would look at is, let's get intentional about what you're wanting to create. Before we worry about the check boxes and building any systems, what kind of culture do you want? And for me, culture can be interpreted as so many different things. For me, culture means the environment in which your people are doing the work and how they go about doing their work. So the first step, I think, is developing your core values. What are the things that matter most to you about how you do your work? Is it how you drive for results? Is it everyone feels like they belong? Is it right? Like, there's no right or wrong answer. It's you as the founder get the choice to have a blank canvas, and you can paint whatever strokes you want on it. There's no right or wrong with core values, but that's what's going to start your culture. And when you get that settled, everything else is going to come, because core values is what is actually the kind of that nucleus of everything. And so when you set your intention towards creating those core values, from my experience, everything else will come and resources will show up, because there are a million ways to take care of your people. There are a million ways to get all the checklists filled. And so there's a million ways to set up your org chart, for that matter. There's tons of ways. But what is unique to you is what you really need to start with. And that, for me, is set up your core values, figure out exactly what those are, define them. I recommend no more than 5, and get started there. And then from there, you get a little more clear as well on, we have an ICP we have the ideal customer profile. Well, it's the same thing. Create an ideal employee profile. How do those people work? Are you wanting people who just clock in and do their work and then they head out? Are you wanting people who are giving them their whole selves to work? Are you wanting people who are high effort but don't really pay attention to results? Or are you wanting people that are really paying attention to results? Again, you get to choose. There's no right or wrong. And so when you take your core values and you match it with what I call your IEP, you're going to have a structure there that now you can paint with inside of these boundaries, and then everything else becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. So it's like, I've never heard the IEP before. And I think I'll be there, the people listening here go, we never thought of that before, an IEP, because we're always talking about, ICP, client profile, ownership profile, but an employee profile as well. And I think it's extremely important. And I love your analogy of you can do strokes. It's your business. You can do the strokes. And it's almost like you got two colors to start with. There's the color that you want, and then the color of your employee. Those are 2 colors. What painting can you make with those 2 colors first before we expand? Let's get those 5 things done first from that. I think that's a great analogy to use. So the world has changed. You've said that many times now. So in your experience, we've been through the COVID, and that's changed an awful lot of working environments globally. It doesn't matter who you are, this work from home, this new work. It used to be work from home was having a nice day. Now work from home became the only way to work. And now there's a big shift moving on now for various economic reasons or whatnot to bring people back into the workplace. But the world has changed. So what are your insights, or what insights can you share with us on having that balance now between the business needs of having a team internally, or on the other side of a work from home or more remote way of working, that we tend to have nowadays. What insights can you share with that balance?
Yeah, the world changed 5 years ago. That is for sure. I talked to a lot of colleagues in HR at the time, and we're all like, the book that we've all been following just got thrown out. Like, I don't know, like legislation, I mean, so many things changed. And so I agree. As you said, a lot of work from home happened, and it is definitely something that is expected, depending on the industry. Tech industry, it's expected that you can work from home at least part of the week. And so, people go in expecting that. And I also think people don't realize the pros and cons of it. It sounds great to work from home, but there is also this other idea of like, now the lines are murky between when work time starts and when work time ends. And that's both a concern, I think, that the business owner needs to pay attention to, as well as the team member. Because for team member, when we think about, well, let's actually start with business owner. So from a business owner perspective, the most important thing, I think, to manage a remote team is knowing what results you are asking them to create. And it's being really specific. One great way of doing that is metrics and KPIs. Give them specific metrics you're asking them to hit, and then you follow up with them to make sure they're being hit. One of the biggest questions I would get asked by CEOs is like, well, how do I know if my people are doing their work? And I'm like, well, that's less of a work from home problem and more of a you problem. Are you looking at if they're getting their work done or not? Have you hired managers? If you're that big, do you have managers who are paying attention to that? And if you're really focused and intentional and on the same page, you're going to know pretty quickly if people are doing their work. So that's my advice from that standpoint for a business owner is everybody has a number. Everybody has a metric. Everybody has a clear picture that you both see. It's written down somewhere what they are expected to do. And and you have a cadence of checking in on that, right? And you have checked in. Did they hit their numbers this week? I also require, one big thing for me is self-reporting. I think every person should have a number and every person should be reporting on it themselves every week. It's not the manager's job to chase down those numbers and chase down their people. It is the person's job to know this is what I was expected to hit and this is how I did it. And I think that I've seen that kind of thought process alleviate a lot of that tension that a business owner feels like, are they doing it? Are they not? So that's one piece of it. And then from the team member side of it, I encourage my clients to consider, again, in their IEP, I encourage them to consider how do they want their team members to function in this world of chaos? A lot of tech companies have a lot of chaos, and that just comes with it. One of the CEOs I worked with before said, if we had our crap together, we wouldn't be growing. We would be flat. So I'm okay with us not having our crap together, right? I'm good with that because that means we're going on a diagonal. And so people don't always understand that. And so if you're just casting this wide net to just grab anybody you can that might have some skills, and you haven't been specific on how that person needs to look at things, that's going to be an important step. So for me, I always encourage my founders and my CEOs to say, can this person be autonomous? Can they exercise personal agency? And if they can, and that's part of your IEP, you have a lot less concern with the work from home piece as well, because you can assume and assess that they are taking care of their own needs. They are managing their time well. They are, aware of what their boundaries and their limits are for their own self-care. I'm very, I want to say against, but I recommend not being an employer that is managing your team members' emotions or managing what you expect their ability to be. You need to measure their actual results and what they are producing, as opposed to managing what you think they might be feeling or, playing any games with that. It's really important to just be black and white. This is what you're responsible for. And then doing that with care. That's the other piece.
Yeah.
You can have the metric. And if you're like, hey, you big jerk, you missed your number. That's a whole lot different than, hey, I noticed you missed your number. What's going on for you? What's happening? I know you had a rough week last week. Do you think that's what it is? Or, and just addressing it with actually care for that person and the human that they are. Work from home becomes a really great gift for both the business and the team member, as long as you can think about it in those ways.
I think it's a great way to look at it, Tori. And it brings me back, and I think that a lot of tech leaders here would resonate with this. In tech, it is about your numbers. It is about the data. We run the whole business by the data itself. It's very binary. It's a yes, it's a no, it's a black or it's a white. And I was taught many years early in my career that you don't have to manage people that well if you can manage the process. If you can manage the process, then the people kind of take care of itself. And it kind of goes back to what you were just saying there about the KPIs. If everyone has the KPI, then you're managing the process of the KPI, and therefore the people are kind of looked after until there is an issue, like you said. Then with care, if the KPI, if rather than trying to manage 90 people 90% of the time, you're managing the KPI 90% of the time with a self-reporting, then you've only got now 10% of time to deal with it, or 10% of it to deal with the people with care. But people are people. And this leads me to my next question, which is really interesting. When working with leaders that you've worked with before, what would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions they have or they've encountered about the relationship between employee team satisfaction and profitability? Is always going to be one in a world now where we change, where we do have to care, but we also need the profit, because we don't need the profitability, there's no one to care about, right? So what is the biggest misconceptions that founders are having, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah, I love that you said care. That right there is the misconception, right? Like, we either have to be like kind of fake with it, because like fake it till you make it. If you don't really feel care, we're going to offer care. So that, that was great. I think, it is a common misconception that if you care about your culture, you don't care about the bottom line. There's like this common thing, like, I got to let people just do what they want. I got to let people, have what they need. I have to make my benefit package so huge, even though I can't afford that in my business, whatever the case is. And I think that misconception is really dangerous, because it's taking away the authenticity of the care I'm talking about. Because the reality is, and one of my big missions in my business had been, helping founders make a solid bottom line through their front line. I think the two of those go hand in hand. And, if all we care about is the bottom line, but we don't care about the people, some companies have proven you can get there, and that can happen. But if that goes against your personal vision and mission for your life, then you're going to be pretty unhappy when you get that bottom line where it is, and you've just stepped all over everybody in the team. And so the opportunity, I think, is in the idea that the way is through. And so when you can, there's the saying, happy wife, happy life. I think it is happy team members, happy customers. And the reality is, you don't have to let your team walk all over you. You don't have to have a ping pong, table in the break room. You don't have to have unlimited PTO. You don't have to do any of these big things, right? Or no backbone. You don't have to have either of those, because it's how you look at your team and how you structure the results they're producing so that it matches your bottom line. As founders, your bottom line, what it's going to take to get there better than anybody. Those numbers. So translate that, break it down into the functions and the seats that you have on your team, and see how their metrics roll up to the top line metrics. For example, GRR is going to be a really important metric for, especially in SaaS, right? So GRR is important. Well, the department head of customer success shouldn't be the only one who cares about GRR. How does that metric roll down to the rest of the team? And then see which role that is, right? And so that's some of the KPIs that you set up for them should always roll up to your metrics. They should also have a balancing metric, so that it's not just about hitting the number. It's also about how you hit the number. And so when you can do that for all of your top line metrics and roll it backwards and see how each person is going to own that, your numbers are going to be covered. So then it becomes, okay, now how do I care for this person or line of people in a way that they are the most functional they can be? And so it's more about the psychology of supporting those people. And we're all humans. We all know what it's like to be a good human, right? And we all know what it's like to be a crappy human. And so we know that when we're treating people like garbage or like tools, they're going to be a tool, and that's all they're going to be. But when you can treat them like an integral part of your business, they're going to thrive, and they're going to produce numbers that really matter to your top line numbers. So that for me is I think the people are the way to get those numbers hit. And then it just is a matter of finding what makes them tick.
Yeah. Great bit of advice there. I love that about that. As I said, if you treat them like a tool, they will be a tool, and the tools go blunt, and then you got to replace that tool. So you're just opening up a whole new bucket of pain anyway, as opposed to looking after them. So that leads me to a probably pretty obvious question, right? That there's it doesn't matter what size of a team you are, what size of a company you are, but I want to dial it back to specifically, let's say a founder is limited on resources, when it comes to their team, because just listening to you, it can be very invigorating how to look after a team, but can also be quite daunting and overwhelming. It's almost like a whole new thing we got to look for. So if a tech founder had limited resources, where would you advise they prioritize their efforts? Compliance, employee engagement, or systems building? As you say, finding that culture, putting everything in place. Which order should they put it in? They know they're going to get there eventually, but they've got to just focus on one thing first.
Yeah.
Which order should they put it in?
Sure. So assuming they already have core values, that is for sure where I would start. But assuming they already have core values and they understand the culture that they're trying to create, for me, the next step is looking at what processes do I have in place that are scalable. For example, you need a good hiring process. If your people matter this much, hiring a bad one is not great. And it can cost you a lot. It can cost you multiple years' salary for that position if you make a bad hire. I've seen that happen. That is not an inflated metric. I have personally experienced it. So a good hiring process is incredibly important. From there, I think a process around how you are listening to your team and how you are giving feedback is the next most important process. And so, you might call those performance reviews. I don't love that phrase because I think it's overdone. And we imagine the flickering light and a checklist when we think of performance reviews, but you could call them pulse surveys, pulse checks. We're a very, the company I work for now, we're very sports analogy. So we call them huddles. We do monthly huddles. We do bi-yearly halftime conversations, right? So you can have fun with it. But it's the idea of are you listening to them? Are you getting feedback from them on what's working and not working? And are you clear and giving them clear feedback on what's working and what's not working? That is missed so often. The number of times I've been in a room when someone got fired and it was a surprise to them. Now, barring layoffs, obviously that's a surprise to everybody, but a performance-based firing should never be a surprise because you've been having conversations with this person when things don't work and when it's small. You want to talk about it when it's a small thing. Hey, you were late to this meeting. Talk about that. Don't wait until they've been late to 12 meetings and then they show up late to a client meeting and now all of a sudden it's this big deal and you're ready to fire them because they're tardy all the time. Talk to them about it the first time you see it. A very common framework I use is what's working, what's not working, and what's wanted and needed. And it's just holding that space because you want to hear from them the answers to those questions and you want to give them the answers to those questions. So I think those are the two most important. The third process I think is really valuable if you are an organization where your IEP is related to high growth and high functioning team members. Those people want to know where they're headed. So the third process I think that's really important is career development and that they know what their path is. So career pathing or talent development, you're sending them to courses, something around that, whatever fits your business. But I would say those are the three most important things you could start with once you've identified what your core values are in your culture. And then from there, it's really simple. It's just follow through. It's do what you say you're going to do, build trust with your team members. That speaks volumes. If you say you're going to send them something by the end of the week, send them that thing by the end of the week. Because, those little things are like death by 1,000 cuts. Like the more you tell your person you're going to do something and you don't, even if it's small and you don't reconcile it with them, it hits them, it cuts them somewhere. And that's when that's a big part of when employers are surprised by a solid team member leaving. It's been probably a death of 1,000 cuts. And that is the number one thing that cuts your team members when you don't follow through with what you say you're going to do with them.
Absolutely. Great point there. I love that analogy of the death by 1,000 cuts because you don't realize it. You're thinking everything's okay. Treat your employees, treat your team members like you want to treat your clients. Like you say, if you say you're going to do something, make sure they get it. Make sure it, no matter how small it is. There's been so much to unpack here, Tori. But before I let you go, I've got one more question for you. As I said, you've shared so many insights with us today, and thank you very much on that. If there was one big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with from today, what would that big takeaway be?
The biggest takeaway, the thing that if you hear nothing else than this, be intentional with the culture that you're creating. Every company has a culture. It's just a matter of whether it is what they want it to be, whether they've intended it to be that way. And so be intentional as a founder, you get to decide what you're creating. You get to decide the environment. So if you find yourself complaining, my people aren't working hard enough, this or that, stop. Take a look at yourself, see where maybe you are actually contributing to the breakdown you don't want, and be intentional about the shift. Because as founder and CEO, you get to decide what that culture looks like. And ultimately, you're the main person responsible for it. You can hire an HR team. You can hire the best people ops person in the world. But ultimately, it's going to come from you. You're where sets that foundation. And it's your dream, your intention that's going to make that happen. So if you hear nothing else, hear that. It's your intention that's going to make this thing a reality, and it starts with you.
What an excellent place to bring this great episode to a close. Intent, have that intention. They're the ones holding that brush. Make sure they use it properly. Absolutely love that. Tori, thank you very much for all the insights you've shared with us today. If people want to get hold of you and chat with you, are you on LinkedIn? What's the best way to get hold of you?
I am on LinkedIn. Absolutely. You can feel free to check me out there. I'm Tori Bradford. And yeah, I'd love to connect.
Brilliant. Well, I'll make sure your link is in the show notes so people can get hold of you because, it's been a fascinating conversation. I always know when it's a great conversation when I look at the time and think, oh, wow, I can talk about this for so much longer, but, we've got to draw it a close where it is. So again, thank you very much Tori, for all your time and insights today.
Thank you so much for having me, Gary. It's been an honor.
It's been lovely. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for yet another episode of the Growth Focus podcast. And as always, if you've taken one thing or a few things from here, please make sure you comment on it and like it and whatnot. But two more things, please make sure you subscribe. So if you're looking to learn from tech leaders like we have on this podcast, subscribing is the easy way to get notified as and when we have new episodes. But more importantly, this is about sharing and growing together. So if you know anybody that could benefit from the insights that Tori has shared with you today, please make sure that you share this episode so they can get the benefit as well. So until next time, as always, remember, do the very best, keep on growing, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye.